2 hours ago, a classified National Security Council assessment began circulating among senior White House advisors, Pentagon leadership, and the directors of 3 separate intelligence agencies. The document does not celebrate. It does not declare victory. It asks a question that nobody inside the administration anticipated having to ask when Operation Epic Fury was authorized on the morning of February 28th. The question is this: what do you do when the regime you destroyed does not fall cleanly, does not surrender formally, and does not produce a successor government capable of signing anything? What do you do when the decapitation works so completely that the head is gone but the body has split into 3 separate organisms, each pursuing an incompatible strategy, none of them in full control of the weapons and resources the original regime left behind? The operation destroyed the Islamic Republic's command structure in 12 hours. Creating the conditions for what comes next may take 12 years. And right now, in the ruins of that command structure, 3 factions are fighting for control of a nuclear-adjacent state with approximately $700 million in missing Revolutionary Guard funds, a dispersed asymmetric military capability that survived every strike package intact, and no internationally recognized authority capable of entering a ceasefire agreement that any of the other factions would honor. Trump wanted a knockout blow. He got one. The problem is that the opponent did not fall. It fragmented. And fragmented opponents do not sign peace treaties. They metastasize. This is not the story the White House has been telling. The public narrative of Operation Epic Fury has been built around a sequence of undeniably significant military achievements. 900 targets struck in the first 12 hours. Iran's conventional naval fleet reduced to operational irrelevance. Air defense networks degraded to the point where Allied aircraft operate over Iranian territory with minimal interception risk. And at the apex of those achievements, the one that was supposed to end the strategic equation permanently, the elimination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and approximately 40 senior military and security officials, alongside the destruction of the expert assembly building that would have managed the succession process. On paper, that outcome represents the most complete decapitation of a hostile state's command structure in the history of modern warfare. In practice, it has produced a situation that American strategic planners are now describing, in private and with considerable discomfort, as the problem that precision violence creates when it is applied to a system that was designed to survive exactly this kind of assault. To understand why Epic Fury worked too well, you have to understand what the Islamic Republic actually was as a governing architecture. It was not a conventional state with a single chain of command that flows from a supreme leader downward through identifiable subordinates to identifiable executors. It was a deliberately redundant, deliberately opaque, deliberately decentralized system of overlapping power centers that was built over 40 years specifically to prevent any single strike from producing a clean succession. Khamenei's elimination does not produce a vacancy that the next figure in a constitutional line of succession fills. It produces a contest, and the Nashville executions, the killing of foreign nationals, including American citizens on espionage charges that Washington used as the final justification for authorizing Epic Fury, guaranteed that the contest would begin in the worst possible conditions. Not with the Islamic Republic intact and capable of managing its own internal politics, but with its institutional architecture shattered, its financial reserves partially looted by factions moving fast in the chaos, and its military wing split between commanders who want to negotiate an exit and commanders who have spent their entire careers preparing for exactly this moment of total confrontation with the American-Israeli axis. But this is where it gets serious. Because the 3 factions that have emerged from the ruins of centralized Iranian authority are not equally dangerous. They are dangerous in completely different ways, and managing all 3 simultaneously is a task for which the current American strategic posture has no coherent framework. The first faction, which diplomatic sources in Muscat and Doha are calling the Transition Corps, is led by Ali Larijani, Masoud Pezeshkian, and Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf. This group controls what remains of the regular army, maintains functional relationships with the Qom seminary networks, and has been quietly signaling through intermediaries that a negotiated de-escalation is possible if certain conditions are met. Those conditions include sanctions relief, security guarantees against further military action, and a political process that preserves some institutional continuity from the current system. In other words, this faction wants a deal. It has the institutional relationships to potentially deliver one, And it is the faction that Witkoff and Kushner have been attempting to reach through the same back-channel architecture that produced the 15-point framework. The problem is that the Transition Corps does not control the military assets that make a ceasefire meaningful. It cannot demobilize the Revolutionary Guard remnants. It cannot order the Basij networks to stand down. It cannot compel the Radical Continuity faction to honor terms it did not agree to. Signing an agreement with the Transition Corps is the equivalent of signing a lease with a tenant who does not hold the keys to the building. The second faction, the Stability Council, is the one that nobody talks about publicly, but that every regional government is quietly trying to keep alive. It consists of the technocratic and bureaucratic elite that actually runs the Iranian state's day-to-day functions. The central bank officials who are preventing a complete currency collapse. The energy ministry managers who are keeping partial oil infrastructure operational. The food distribution networks that are preventing the kind of humanitarian catastrophe that would force a regional refugee crisis affecting every neighboring country simultaneously. This faction has no military power, it has no political legitimacy in the traditional sense, but it has the institutional knowledge to keep 7 million people in Tehran from starving in the next 90 days, which makes it the single most strategically important group in Iran from the perspective of anyone who does not want to manage a humanitarian emergency on top of a military conflict on top of a political vacuum. The third faction is the one that keeps the most senior people at the NSC awake at the hours when the official briefings have ended. The Radical Continuity Group, led by surviving elements of the Revolutionary Guard's hardline command structure and Basij commanders who have spent years building autonomous operational networks, has responded to the decapitation of the Islamic Republic's leadership not with surrender or negotiation, but with strategic acceleration. These are commanders who believe, with genuine ideological conviction, that the Islamic Revolution's survival and export is a religious obligation that supersedes any political calculation about cost or feasibility. They control distributed asymmetric military assets that survived Epic Fury's strike packages because they were designed to survive exactly that. They are the operators behind the Hormuz mining campaign. They are the coordinators of the proxy network activation in Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq. And according to 2 intelligence assessments now circulating at senior levels in Washington, they have access to approximately $700 million in Revolutionary Guard funds that moved out of traceable financial infrastructure in the 72 hours immediately following Khamenei's elimination. That money is now funding operations that the Transition Corps cannot stop, the Stability Council cannot prevent, and American military planners cannot fully map because they do not know where it went. And what happened next is what produced the NSC assessment that landed 2 hours ago. The Radical Continuity faction's operational posture over the past 3 weeks has demonstrated something that American strike planners did not adequately model. Decapitation of a state's leadership does not neutralize its asymmetric capacity if that capacity was designed to operate without central command authorization. The limpet mines in Hormuz waters were not deployed on Khamenei's order. They were deployed on pre-authorized standing orders that went into effect automatically upon confirmation of his elimination. The Hezbollah saturation campaign that registered 105 attack sequences against Israeli territory on March 25 was not directed from Tehran in real time. It was executed according to a playbook that had been prepared, rehearsed, and pre-positioned over years of anticipation that this moment would eventually arrive. The Islamic Republic's leadership is gone. Its revenge architecture is fully operational, and the distinction between those two facts is the strategic gap that Epic Fury's planners did not close. Trump's political exposure in this moment is unlike anything his previous crises have produced, because it is generated not by failure but by a specific kind of success. The operation achieved every military objective it was assigned. It also produced a strategic situation that is, in several measurable dimensions, more dangerous and less manageable than the one it replaced. The Islamic Republic with Khamenei at its head was a hostile state with identifiable decision-makers, functioning diplomatic channels, and the institutional capability to enter and honor agreements. The Islamic Republic's ruins, divided among 3 factions with incompatible strategies and no unified command authority, is something for which American strategic doctrine has no established playbook. How do you negotiate a ceasefire when no single party controls enough of the relevant military assets to make the ceasefire hold? How do you achieve the disarmament objectives that justified the operation when the faction willing to discuss disarmament does not command the forces that need to be disarmed? How do you declare victory when the military campaign's most significant achievement has created conditions that are generating ongoing American casualties and ongoing energy market disruption with no identifiable endpoint? The international dimension of the power vacuum has accelerated a dynamic that American strategists had hoped to prevent. Russia and China, both of which declined to endorse Epic Fury's military objectives, have moved quickly and quietly to establish relationships with all three Iranian factions simultaneously. Russian intelligence has been in contact with radical continuity commanders. Chinese economic officials have been in contact with the Stability Council's technocratic leadership. Both countries' diplomatic channels are open to the transition corps. Moscow and Beijing are not trying to resolve Iran's internal power contest. They are positioning themselves to have leverage over whichever faction eventually consolidates enough control to matter. That positioning means that any American attempt to shape Iran's post-conflict political architecture will be contested by two permanent Security Council members who have already established competing influence networks inside every faction worth influencing. The American business community, which had initially accepted the conflict's economic disruptions as temporary costs of a decisive military operation, is now receiving a different message from its own risk analysts. A power vacuum in Iran is not a temporary disruption to energy markets. It is a structural condition that could persist for months or years, with different factions controlling different pieces of energy infrastructure, different factions enforcing or not enforcing passage through Hormuz, and no single authority capable of providing the contractual certainty that energy markets require to price risk accurately. Lloyd's has already moved Iranian political risk into a category previously reserved for active civil war zones. The insurance implications for Gulf routing are severe and will not normalize until a recognized governing authority with functional territorial control emerges in Tehran. That emergence, given the current three-way contest, is not on any timeline that anyone is willing to put in writing. 2 hours ago, the NSC assessment asked the question that the public framing of Operation Epic Fury has been carefully constructed to avoid. Did the United States achieve its strategic objectives, or did it achieve its military objectives at the cost of its strategic ones? The answer, as the assessment documents in 17 pages of classified analysis, is that both things are true simultaneously in a way that makes neither celebration nor accountability straightforwardly available. The regime that threatened American interests with nuclear ambition and proxy violence has been destroyed. The conditions that produced that regime's threats, the security imperatives, the ideological commitments, the asymmetric capabilities, have not been destroyed. They have been distributed among three factions, one of which is actively pursuing those threats without the constraints that centralized command authority imposed, one of which is trying to negotiate but cannot deliver, and one of which is simply trying to keep the lights on while the other two fight. Trump wanted a knockout blow that ended the Iranian threat permanently. He got a knockout blow that shattered the Iranian state into pieces that are, individually, harder to manage than the unified adversary they replaced. Washington is now searching for a diplomatic solution with a country that has no single government to negotiate with, a military solution against targets that dispersed before they could be struck, and a political narrative that can explain how winning this completely became this complicated this fast.